Welcome to CUNY-NYSIEB's webinar, Teaching Practices and Translanguaging Pedagogy in Elementary Transitional and One-Way Dual Language Bilingual Programs. We'll be hearing the experiences of a teacher in an integrated second grade classroom today. Now we're going to welcome Hulda Yao, second grade teacher at School 28 from Rochester. Hulda, welcome to CUNY-NYSIEB.
Thank you, Luz. I'm a second grade bilingual teacher in School 28, Rochester, New York. And I teach 25 students, 12 of them special ed. And I teach with my amazing co-teacher, Mariela Polito, who so graciously is in our classroom with our kids so I could be here. Thank you so much, CUNY-NYSIEB, for this opportunity. So these are the primary objectives of today's presentation. So I'm going to give an overview of the past and the present programs in School 28. And so our bilingual programs, and I'm going to share the structural components of our bilingual program and the role of translanguaging in my classes. So we'll talk a little bit about our bilingual space that I like to call my official translanguaging space, and English language arts with translanguaging, and home language arts with translanguaging as well. Our school was a transitional bilingual school, and then it went to one-way dual language. One-way dual language means that all kids are, it's not half English speaking and half Spanish speaking, but they're all Spanish speaking students. And so when we had a second grade transitional bilingual program, math was in English from September to June, and instruction was in Spanish the first half of the academic year with ESL push-in services, and instruction was in English the second half of the academic year with ESL push-in services as well. Now we are a one-way dual language program, and so this is our first year, and we try to keep it 50-50 with Spanish and English. And so instruction in each language, the percents, they remain the same from September to June. And so there is ESL pull-out services. And so with ESL, it depends on the teacher and the space in the classroom. If I have the space to be able to have ESL push in, she'll be in the classroom with our students if there's a space for her to be able to work at the tables with small groups of students. Or this year she does pull out services, and it works really well too. So this is our daily schedule, and so math is in English, and I do some translanguaging in math. I have to try to focus a lot in the math language in English because our students take a test on the computer. It's a test mandated by our district. It's the NWEA, so I want to make sure they do very well in the test. And so I definitely have to use translanguaging within math to be able to bridge that gap. And so our social studies and science is our bilingual space. And so we have ELA with translanguaging, which is English language arts, and that is strictly in English, and then home language arts, that is strictly in Spanish, and we do translanguaging as well in that Spanish space. We do integrated instruction in our classroom, and the good thing about doing integrated instruction is that it provides meaningful learning experiences for the students. They know that what we're doing in social studies and in listening and learning is going to be part of our writing genre as well. And so it also allows students multiple opportunities to apply the skills they are learning. If we're working on sentence structure, going from simple to more complex sentence structures in English language arts, we do the same thing in home language arts. And so it also alleviates the feeling that there's not enough time in the day or in the week, in the month, or even in the academic year. There is a lot of pressure to meet all the standards. There's just not enough space. So when you integrate instruction, it just creates a really natural flow. And I think that's the best way to actually have our emergent bilinguals be successful. I'm going to be talking about our bilingual space, and it's our favorite space for my co-teacher and I. We have 25 kids, 12 are special ed, and so we usually have to differentiate instruction. And this is our one time where it's we have 45 minutes with on the carpet, and we feel like a little family. We come on the carpet and we get to integrate social studies with writing. We do science with writing. I like to call it our official translanguaging space. We differentiate instructions for writing, and I'll show you that in a little bit. And we use the Engage New York listening and learning curriculum. So we want to make sure that our thematic units are systematically structured with translanguaging support. And of course, the use of language is very flexible for collaboration and for writing as well. For this slide that you're seeing is from listening and learning curriculum from Engage New York. And so we usually start talking about, in September, talking about our communities. So we talk about urban communities, we talk about suburban communities and rural communities. And it's great because the kids are from urban communities and I'm from the suburb, and my wonderful co-teacher, she's from a rural area. So we get to really talk about where we live in our communities. And so we quickly go global with this. We immediately start talking about India and China, so we could link what we've been doing with talking about local communities and talking about communities at large. And so we ask that question, how do communities grow and change over time? And how do we shape our environment as well? And so this gives us the opportunity to target really the listening and speaking standards. So where kids have to wait for their turn to speak, they have to make sure they link any comments or any ideas they have to the comments that somebody has previously made. So it's a little bit of everything. We do social studies, when we do science, and we also want to make sure we don't only target those standards, but we also target the listening and speaking standards as well. So this is a strategy that I use frequently. It's preview, view, review. And so what I do when I'm going to preview a theme, we do it in Spanish. I want to make sure that students have that background knowledge. And so you can't build something on a weak foundation. So for students to acquire new learning, it definitely needs to be established in a solid foundation. And so even when we're doing the curriculum of listening and learning, which is very scripted and there are pictures that go with it, we preview the topics sometimes in Spanish through a different book, a picture book, or a video. I usually use picture books or books from Reading A to Z, or I go to Discovery Education and use videos. Sometimes I find the videos in Spanish, but if I don't and I only have them in English, I still use them and I lower down the volume and we still have that conversation. We still talk about the topic in Spanish. And so we move on. When we move on to view, it's in English. The curriculum is in English, but I focus on highlighting those tier 2 words and tier 3 words. Tier 2 words are academic vocabulary. And so like the word suffering or, unhappiness. And so I highlight those, as you can see, and I make sure that I have those translated into Spanish. And so words like tier 3, like Buddhism, that are more domain specific, I want to make sure I point those out as well. And so I don't translate everything from English to Spanish. There are specific moments when I'm doing the script that I move on, that I do translanguage. So it's very strategic and it's very specific when I do it. So at the end, I do review. We do it in Spanish, and so we have some questions that we ask the kids, as you can see. And so this is where I want to check for understanding. So it gives me the opportunity to, when I review in Spanish, it gives me the opportunity to really see what the kids have learned. Did they get it? And so this is one strategy that I not only use for bilingual space, but I use throughout our day as well. And so what you're seeing here is Lee and Low books. I love Lee and Low books on this website. So what I do for to preview any topic or to actually extend on a learning that I feel the kids are really interested in. Lee and Low books has amazing books in different languages, as you can see, English, Spanish, they're bilingual, Chinese. And so it has the levels as well. And as you can see on the screen, they also have a teaching guide. And what's great about the teaching guide, it's very explicit, and it even tells you how to teach the book to English language learners. It has the themes, focus vocabulary, and so I think it's a great resource. Most of their books have the guide, have the teaching guide. So when we're done with social studies, when we're done with our theme for social studies or for science, we do writing. And so I allow students to use their entire linguistic repertoire in a flexible way, doing planning, drafting, and revising. Students that need that extra support, they go with my amazing special ed teacher who works with them more one-on-one. These are students that are not quite literate in their home language, so she creates for them sentence starters and word banks with pictures to allow them to really be able to be successful in writing. So our writing is highly scaffolded. Definitely writing A2Z is our place to go when we are looking to differentiate instruction. The little triangles you see on the top lets you know if it's first grade, second grade, or third grade graphic organizers. And so it's really differentiated. And so my co-teacher uses the one that has that first triangle. And so I use the one that has the 3 triangles, which is more third grade because it has, when kids write, they have to have 3 main ideas. But when we were talking about social studies, we talked about their natural environment and how these communities were able to grow and traditions and their religion. So this graphic organizer, even though it was a little bit of a higher level, really fit what we were trying to accomplish. So it's definitely one of my go-to places for resources and for writing and to differentiate instruction. This is one of the writing pieces of one of my students that she did. She's really, she's our only student that is at a second grade reading level in English, and I thought she would choose English to write her piece on China. She chose Spanish, and it was a little surprising to me, but she did a really good job. We talked about, the introduction and the conclusion, and we had created a bilingual chart for them so they could really feel that they could have chosen English or Spanish to write the piece, but most of them in the beginning of the academic year choose Spanish. That's their comfort zone, and so she does too, and I think really soon she'll be ready to write and move on to English. And so we're getting ready to write a persuasive piece now in the next week, actually this week when I get right back into my classroom. And so these are the charts we created for them. Each chart would represent a paragraph. They're going to write 3 paragraphs. And so what I did, I got pictures and I got this idea from my special ed teacher that so wonderfully does this for our special ed kids. And I thought it would be great to really do it in big charts and put it up in the wall and have our kids really see if they wanted to write about the human body and how to stay healthy. If they wanted to write it in English, they have the opportunity to do that. And so with having these charts, they really feel comfortable into taking that risk into their new language. So now, if you have any questions, you could send them. All right. I have a question here. Did the curriculum you're using have the bilingual space that you are describing, or did you create it? And if yes, why? The curriculum does not have, our curriculum as in our schedule during the day, our schedule during the day has a bilingual space in it. If you look at part 154, there is, it gives a space for that, for us to have that bilingual space. And it's definitely highly encouraged by our district director. Mayra Ortiz has so wonderful been able to support us in our home language arts curriculum. But yes, our daily schedule has that space in it. And if you're talking specifically about a curriculum that I use, the curriculum that I use for listening and learning or for any of the other classes, they don't have built-in translanguaging. So I actually then bring in the translanguaging into that space. Either it be a space that it's just home language, it's just in Spanish or in English. Thank you so much. Very good question. So can you talk about how you support students who are more dominant in English? How does translanguaging work for them? Well, it's what I love about translanguaging is that if the students are dominant in their home language, because we use translanguaging and we use it for everything in academic language, it gives them the opportunity to actually get better in their home language. Their academic Spanish increases. And so it gives, when it comes to translanguaging, you support both groups. You support the groups that are dominant in Spanish, you support the groups that are dominant in English, because when we are doing any type of the curriculum, and I use the language objectives at a word level, which is just the words that the students will need to know, the vocabulary they need to know to be able to complete any task. That's why we do it in Spanish or in English, as you saw with the charts earlier, because if I have a student that it is like one of my girls is at a second grade level in English and she chooses to write in English, that is fine. That is her choice, and we welcome that in the classroom. So yes, we want to make sure we support both students, both type of students. Another question? Very good question. You mentioned that you have students in the bilingual space as full group, and this is an opportunity for all your students to better show what they know. Can you expand on that? Yes. Our bilingual space, it's 45 minutes and it's on the carpet. And so they're able to show me what they know because I want to make sure in preview when our listening and learning block, well, for 45 minutes, it's really conversational. And so what I love about it, that they're able to really show me what they know because they can use the language of their choice, either it be Spanish or English. And it's our time that we collaborate. And it's our time that we do a little bit of writing as well. So not only do through conversation and through collaboration while we're all sitting on the carpet, do they let me know where they are and what they know, but also through writing. So I assessed a lot. I assess a lot how they internalizing our concepts and what we're learning and the themes by their writing as well. Not only the collaboration that we do on the carpet when we're sitting down. Very good question. Okay, our last question, and then we'll move on. Are all 25 students in your class considered home language Spanish? Yes, they are. Or half Spanish speaking and half English speaking. No, our program is the one-way dual, so all 25 students are very much Spanish dominant. So any English curriculum that we do is incredibly difficult for them. So yes, all of them are Spanish speaking, and so they need a lot of support, and I do get a lot of support from the different teachers that come into our classroom. All right, I'm moving on now to our English language arts space with translanguaging, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure of that space. And so we have the gen ed teacher, which is myself, my special ed teacher, and our ESL teacher, and even a reading specialist that comes in to get our students to work with our tier 2 intervention students. And so we have ESL pull-out services. Sometimes ESL is pushed in certain years and sometimes is pull-out. It really depends on the teacher and the space in the classroom. We use Engage New York Skills Curriculum, and for independent reading, even though it's ELA, the students can use the language of their choice when it comes to picking their books. Something new I started doing this year, I started using Phonemic awareness to try to get the kids to be able to learn the sounds in English. On the beginning of the year, we teach that short vowel sounds, the O says ah, and when we're moving to consonants, the Y says yeah, but then we move into diagrams, and now it's a whole different sound. And so for them, it can be a little tricky. So what I do, as you can see, I wrote the word oi. If I see that there is a sound that you spell it and it's similar to the one they're using in English, like with oi for oy and oído for oil, I do that so they can to help them out when they're reading and they're not sure what sound that is. They can just we have this right above us, right behind me, where I teach with them, where I instruct them, and so they have access to that. Another thing I started doing with phonemic awareness was that, the word, they're having a lot of problems with J for jet, and so they would say het, and because J in Spanish, it's that sound, and so I wrote a little sign there that says Español. So when they come across that J sound, they know that it's not that sound, but it's the J sound, and that really was helping. It's really helpful for them. Also, hat, that sound H. So in Spanish, H is silent. So whenever they would see an H, they would just completely not sound it out. And so I wrote a little label that says, Español, the J, J. So then the J actually does So I let them know that for if they were going to, when they saw the H, it would make that sound as in Jose. And I thought it would be a little confusing, but surprisingly, it was very helpful for them. So I'm glad I took that risk because it's really paying off. And so it's really paying off with our spelling test. In the beginning, I felt really bad for them. They are English language learners, and these words were really big that they had to spell out for our spelling test. And even though they had a week and we did different activities, they weren't successful at it. So once we started bringing in the classroom that phonemic awareness, they surprisingly did really good. And this is one of my students, their spelling quizzes, and you can see where they had quite a few wrong, and then they just went from 1 to 1. And so what we do here, let's say the word is sister. And so when we're practicing it, I tell the kids, we sound it out in Spanish. So we'll say sister, and so they try to think about it in Spanish. For better, they do the same thing. For sports, so for tricky words like some, we call these tricky words because there might be there are sounds that are in that word that it's not the sounds that you actually write. Like in some, that sound is it's you, and so I teach them that that's the sound for you. But then with the word some, it's very can be a little tricky. So we decided especially with the tricky words, to actually sound them out in Spanish. So the kids started saying some, and without a problem, that becomes a word that they can spell really well. Or especially the word because. We started saying because, and now that's another word that we don't have problems with. So it works really, really well in their Spanish when they're writing in English to bring in that phonemic awareness. And so that's been very, very successful. That's something new I started doing this year. And so now they're using it in all classes, even when we're in math and we're writing out numbers. And I say, how do you spell 1? And they all say one, and we write it that way. So moving forward with translanguaging with independent writing. So in our ELA block, I allow the students to plan their writing in either language. This is a book report that one of my students had to do on the hedgehog and the hare. And so I give them that option to plan or draft in English or Spanish. And then definitely the final copy has to be in English. So they do a lot of peer editing together, and so some of the students are more dominant in English to help out those that are not. But I allow translanguaging. An example you could see here with one of my students, el conejo dijo que el hedgehog que él era rápido, and then he moves on to Spanish to say, the hedgehog. The hare tricked the hedgehog. He talks about the hedgehog's wife. And then at the end, he finishes again with Spanish saying que él perdió. And then he finishes saying the race. And so I allow this just because the students, I want them to not be worrying about the language as much as the content. And so when I am able to give them this opportunity, they have more information that they can actually write about. And so that works really well for us as well. You're seeing on the side the Translanguaging Latino Guide, which is incredible to be able to see how authors use translanguaging in Latino literature. And so we're moving soon to do, we're going to be writing about narrative writing. And so something I want to teach with them is that you can also translanguage for stylistic reasons. And so to really be able to bring forth your bilingual identity and your bilingual voice. And so once we move into narrative writing, I'll be definitely talking more specifically on translanguaging as a writer, as an author, for stylistic reasons. So definitely I recommend you get that guide. It's incredible, and it has different authors, and it has summary for the different books, and it'll have the grade level and the age for each book that's best appropriate for, and it gives you how the author is using translanguaging within that book. So if you have any questions? Yes? How does allowing for translanguaging in ELA help your student learn English? I feel they will speak too much Spanish. I feel my students can never speak enough Spanish, because if they do not speak Spanish, I won't be able to know how much they know. So even when we are writing, they're discussing a book, especially when they're discussing a book, and they're writing about it. They read the book in English. I give them the questions, and they answer in Spanish, even though the book is in English. And I encourage that. I don't want to ever feel that that I don't know, I won't be able to know what the students know unless I give them that opportunity. Even though it's English language arts, even though our stories are in English, I'm not assessing anything other but reading comprehension. So yes, I definitely allow the students to write in Spanish. And I don't think with translanguaging there's too much Spanish. I don't think in my classroom there is such a thing. I think too much Spanish is good in all my classes, because it's their home language. It's how they learn best, and it's how I can best support them. So too much language when it comes to translanguaging, it's a really good thing. What benefits do you see in doing translanguaging with your students who have IEPs, your special ed students? Incredible benefits. If I don't translanguage, now when you're working with special ed students, now you have a whole different ballgame, because not only are you teaching them how to become literate in their home language, you also have to meet the standards for ELA as well. So that is very much when my special ed teacher does an incredible job with supporting them, either through charts, through a lot of visuals, sentence starters. And when it comes to meeting their needs of their IEPs, we are very clear on where their needs are in their IEPs. We have it up on a chart. We're very, we make sure we address those needs at all times, even if the needs are, even if they're in their IEP, it's specific to maybe learning how to write a sentence in English, or it's really specific sometimes when it comes to Spanish or English. We make sure we translanguage for them to be able to meet that goal. Because if they don't know how to put together a sentence in Spanish, and where the subject goes, where the predicate, how to add an adjective, then they won't know that either in English. They won't be able to transfer that. And so definitely for our IEP students, for our special ed students, they benefit greatly from translanguaging, because it's definitely their home language, and they're struggling as it is with that language, being literate. So it's incredible support. And Mariela Polito, my special ed teacher, does incredible things with that. So thank you so much. Very good question. How do you plan for translanguaging? Or do you allow, how do you start? How do you plan for translanguaging? Yes, translanguaging is very specific. You can't come and wing it. You don't come in with an English language curriculum and just read it and go from English to Spanish. That's not what translanguaging is. It's very specific, very systematic. And so you need to make sure you are well-versed in the curriculum. You've read it and you know where these spaces are going to be, especially if a class is in English. If a class like ELA is in English and my administrator comes in, I'm doing all in Spanish, she's probably going to ask me a few questions. She's very supportive, our principal, Ms. Ladd, on translanguaging. She encourages it in all classrooms, but definitely I plan for it ahead of time. Just like when we plan all our lessons, we have to do it in advance. So definitely when I'm home and I'm planning my week, I look for these opportunities or these places where I know that my students might have really hard time understanding a concept or moving forward. And so I know my students enough to know those spaces that might have a little problem with. And so when I plan, I do plan with translanguaging in mind 100% of the time. 100% of the time, that is what guides my instruction, to be able to make sure that there is a foundation for my students to be able to continue to learn their new language. All right. So now we are going to talk a little bit about our home language arts space with translanguaging. And very quickly, we work again with our general education teacher, our special ed teacher, and our consultant teacher. Consultant services are pull out. We do differentiated instruction according to students' reading level. We use our curriculum JABC, which I love. It has a little bit of everything, a little bit about grammar and writing and reading. And we use ENIL, which is a Spanish leveling and assessment system. And again, in home language arts, the students for independent reading get to pick their the language of their choice. I'm going to move along with the sentence building. So this is where I bring it into the classroom, that metalinguistic awareness. I want to make sure the students can see when we're doing sentence building and we're doing it at a beginning level, either in Spanish or in English, they can see both languages side by side. I want them to see, well, you know, in English and in Spanish, did the subject or the predicate change? If we add an adjective, where does it fall in the space within that sentence? And so by having the languages side by side, it creates that bridge from home language, their Spanish, to English language arts. And so this is where using their home language helps me so much during English language arts, because when they're seeing these sentences side by side and how we make them a little bit more complex by adding verbs or adjectives, they can really see where these words fall in. And then they eventually they are becoming better writers because of this strategy, because of, you know, just putting those English and Spanish, putting them side by side. So it's incredible the things that are happening when it comes to using as well English during a home language arts space. So we kind of do translanguaging reversed a little bit. And it's just, again, to integrate and to create that link, that bridge. So for independent reading time, they can either go to our classroom library, and so our books are leveled and they are in English and Spanish. Before, I used to have two libraries. I used to have an English one and I used to have a Spanish one. And now the books are just like my students. They are biliterate, they're bilingual, and so the books are English and Spanish within that same level, are in the same basket. And so for reading A to Z, for RAS kids, it's a great resource. If you don't know about it, go to Reading A to Z. RAS Kids is an incredible support for our English language learners. In independent reading, I create assignments in there for them. And so these assignments, this is where I integrate either social studies or science, whichever one I'm doing during listening and learning. And so this was when we were learning about community. So I created an assignment, so when they go to the computer and they're using RAS Kids, they can go to the assignment and the books are there available for them in English or in Spanish with that same theme of communities that we were learning about in that bilingual space. So it's great support for them. This is our JABC book. This is, it shows just like long range, the chapters and the different aspects of our JABC curriculum. And this is actually right in the beginning pages of the kids' workbooks and my workbook. And so what I do, I want to make sure I integrate what I'm doing in English language arts with home language arts. So I circle in the different concepts that I'm doing with them, either it be adjectives or the verb. I also make sure that whatever I'm doing in listening or learning, which that curriculum is in English, that bilingual space that we have, I also want to make sure I link that to what we're doing in home language arts with JABC. So we're writing a persuasive piece now. So we are looking at, you know, the different types of sentences, and we're looking at sentence structure and introductions, conclusions. And so what I do, I go and I look, and what's good about JABC, and actually what's great about our district, is that our bilingual director allows us to use JABC in a very flexible way. We don't have to go chapter by chapter. I can actually just access what I need and then and move on from there. So really play along with the curriculum in a way that fits well and flows very well with my students. And so I'm going to leave you with these 3 personal goals. Really, to understand translanguaging, you need to know how language works. When I started doing translanguaging, I started with a guide, and it was great. But I felt like something was missing, and my dad from CUNY-NYSIEB nicely sent me this guy, the book on Translanguaging from Ofelia García and Li Wei, and I read it, and everything just clicked. I got it. I got how to translanguage effectively. I think I had an incredible toolbox with the guide, but I wasn't sure how to use the tools. So once I read the book, it really all came together, and I really started beginning to understand language and why what I was doing in the classroom was working. I knew it was working. I just wasn't sure the science behind it, like why this is working, but why is it working? I was always asking those questions. This is great, but I felt like I needed to learn a little bit more. And so with the Translanguaging book by Ofelia García and Li Wei really helped me understand and get the bigger picture of how language works. And so I think also I want you to have another personal goal, collaborate with colleagues. Translanguaging, the guide is made to be used in socially dynamic ways. So I think when you collaborate with your colleagues, it's the best way to be able to go through the guide and explore it. And so taking those small translanguaging steps, once you establish a collegial circle with your colleagues, and the collegial circle is great because it gives you that opportunity to take really small steps and collaborate with your colleagues. And I think your colleagues are a great resource. Mine are. And so every time last year when we did our Translanguaging collegial circle, and this year, it's incredible how much I learn from my colleagues, and I become a better educator because I learn so much from them. And so when you get together with your colleagues, they also become an incredible resource to you. So it gives you a really good space to be able to explore translanguaging. So some questions. How do you students edit their peer work? How do you find it beneficial? They edit their peer work. I go to Writing A to Z, and I have, depending where that student is in their writing proficiency, it's the checklist that I actually print out for them. Now, the checklist, I don't translate everything. In the checklist, I translate key ideas, like the key words, and I can actually do the checklist and put it on the side. Or I will actually create a quick checklist and put it up on chart paper for them. But they do edit their work, and I find it very beneficial because instead of me stepping in and saying, this is how you would say this in English, actually the kids are collaborating, and they're becoming their own little teachers and their own little support system. And so that's the one thing I love about them collaborating and giving them that time, even though when they're editing and revising their own paper, it can be a little time consuming, but I think it's not a negative thing to really allow them this space to do that. It encourages them to actually work together and to be able to do a really good job in writing with each other. And so I think giving them that opportunity is incredibly beneficial. The kids that are more dominant or that are moving along in their English continuum are actually helping those Spanish dominant students, and I find it great where I get to step back and they facilitate each other, and so give each other that support. How does translanguaging help students with their academic Spanish? I think I addressed that before. I'm going to talk about it again. When we translanguage, when I'm doing preview, view, review, or any other area, I make sure that these specific tier 2, tier 3 words that are tier 2 are academic words like observation, suffering, and tier 3 are domain specific, very content specific words. I make sure that I have them displayed in both languages to be able to support those students, not only the ones that are English, the ones that are a little bit more confident with their English, a little more proficient with their English, but also those kids that are on grade level with Spanish. But when you talk about, Hinduism and Buddhism, and when you were talking about communities and China, they don't have all that domain-specific vocabulary. They don't know it in Spanish, and I don't know it in Spanish. So when I'm getting ready, my lessons, getting ready to put them together, and I'm planning, I make sure that I use translanguaging to address those vocabulary words. And just for myself too, it increases my academic Spanish as well as the students by having them, I display them. And so that also is our language objective. I make sure the words that are using are not just any words, are the words that they're going to have to use to be able to complete a task in the classroom independently or with their peers. So it's very specific. They go together? Okay. You mentioned that you first heard about translanguaging and you didn't believe it. What made you change your mind? Can you share how translanguaging changed your teaching practice? Yes, when I heard translanguaging for the first time, I actually heard it by Luz. She was in our school. And I was not sold at all. I was like, absolutely not. She is pretty, but this is not going to work out for me. I just thought that half of that academic year that had to be in English when we were transitional had to be in English. I felt like we need to immerse the children. And it was my special ed teacher was all about translanguaging even before we heard about the concept, and and she was always, you have to support the students, and I was like, that's not supporting them. We need to move them very quickly. And so it was kind of a struggle for me in the beginning to understand it. And once I started collaborating with Tatiana Klein and CUNY-NYSIEB began to come to our school and started working with our school, I started doing small little things. I thought, well, you know what, I can start with preview review. Preview in Spanish, review in English, and then come back to Spanish to assess them. And so now I definitely, what sold me is not so much that idea that sounds great, it's the results I'm getting in the classroom. If I wasn't getting the results I'm getting in writing, in English, there is no way I'd be using it. And that's how I felt in the beginning. I felt like, I didn't want to waste my time. And so it's not wasting your time. When you don't use translanguaging, you're wasting a lot of time. You want to use translanguaging to be able to support the students and to be able, you don't know how well it works and how incredible it is until you start using the different strategies with your students. Give them that opportunity really to grow and to really excel academically by using translanguaging in the classroom. So now I'm going to move it along and have Ofelia. Hola, Ofelia. Ofelia is going to talk a little bit about translanguaging.
Hola, Hulda. Thank you so much for having me do a little commentary on your presentation. I mean, as always, this is a continuum. It's a continuum of people that are holding each other and helping each other as we develop all of this. And I never say this, but I want to acknowledge publicly the work of Dr. Maite Sanchez, who really coordinates all of this, even though she is never in front of the camera. So thank you, Maite. But I think some of the things that we learned from Hulda, and I think I want to first familiarize ourselves with some of the words that she says. I think the first big idea is that of collaboration. She is a collaborative person. She collaborated with CUNY-NYSIEB. She collaborates with Maria Napoli, her special education teacher. She collaborates with the ESOL teacher, with people in her district. So that she is a collaborative person, and she has been able then to start these collegial circles with her classmates, with her colleagues actually, so that they can develop this in the very local sense of what's happening in the school. And you notice that this collaboration that she feels with her peers also happens among the students and their own their peers. So I think that this C of collaboration is very, very important in the instruction that Hulda has shared with us today. I think the second big idea is that of integration. Hulda is inclusive. So we talk a lot about integration and inclusive classrooms. But Hulda has found a way to really include her students with disabilities and a way of making sure that they participate and that they're engaged. And I think this is extremely important, this idea that what she has found is a way to also differentiate instruction. Translanguaging has not only provided her with a way to engage all her students, but to really make sure that she differentiates instruction for her students who are in special education, and that she adapts the curriculum and that she adapts instruction to meet their needs. The curriculum is not one that comes from the top down, but it's one that emerges from the students and her relationship with the students. I think that's a very important idea, that second idea of inclusiveness. I think the third idea that we have in Hulda's instruction is that of engagement. All that she does is adapt her instruction so that the students are engaged. And we know that unless we participate, unless we have a voice, we really cannot learn. So this is extremely important in her instruction. And then I think the fourth big idea, again connected to that of engagement, is that she treats her second graders as people who really need to be engaged, and therefore they have to have a choice. They have to select what it is that they're doing. They have to select the books. They have to select the language. And again, I think that is part of Hulda's generosity in teaching, her ability to be collegial, not only with her colleagues, but also with her students. So those four ideas, I think we can sort of grasp from her presentation. One, the collaborative spirit in which she engages. Two, the inclusiveness of her instruction. Three, the engagement of her instruction. And fourth, the ability to give students choices, selections. Hulda talked about her second grade bilingual students, of which 12 of the 25 are said to be special education, all, of course, emergent bilinguals, and her co-teacher, who really works with her all the time. And she talked about the transition between what she used to do, which was a transitional program in which the first half of the semester of this school year was supposed to be in Spanish, and then the second half completely in English. And she then talked about the way that this became a different type of program, a program that she calls, or they call in the district, a one-way dual language program. That is a program in which both languages are used throughout the academic year, but all the students are Spanish speakers in a continuum. Everything is in continuum these days, right? So it's not that they're of one kind or another, but they're also in continuum. And she told us about the way in which she allocates the two languages. That is, 50% of the time she devotes to English, and 50% of the time she devotes to Spanish with ESL pull-out services. But within those two spaces, she also makes space for translanguaging. That is, in the ELA class, there is translanguaging. In the home language arts class, there is translanguaging. And she also talked about a bilingual translanguaging space that she has developed. And I'll say a few things about that later. I think it's most important that she talked about the small steps that she took. Sometimes when we have to do this, we think, well, how do we start? And Hulda told us she started with small steps. And she said the first thing she felt comfortable doing was doing the preview, view, review. And that's a good way of starting. And what she realized very quickly is that the Tier 2 and the Tier 3 words could be translated into Spanish, and that this would help the children. So again, starting small so that there is a transition. You don't have to do it all at the same time. I think that's extremely important. I think the idea of having material, instructional material, that is relevant for the children, important for the children. She talked about the Lee and Low books, which are so beautifully illustrated and that all of us want to read. She talked about her curriculum, the JABC. She talked about Engage New York, which she uses and she adapts. She talked about videos. She talks about the email. She talked about writing writing A to Z, and she talked about leveled books. And I want to just emphasize the fact that she now has her books in the same basket. That is, not Spanish baskets and English baskets, but as the children have an integrated bilingual identity, the baskets also represent the fact that these are bilingual children and not just Spanish-speaking children or English-speaking children. So she integrates all of this. I think that this is extremely important. One thing that is obvious both in her English language arts instruction and her home language arts space instruction is that she looks across the languages so that the children develop metalinguistic awareness. That is, in the home language arts space, she makes sure that the sentences are side by side so that the children can understand what the structures are. In the ELA space, she talked about phonemic awareness and the fact, again, that she goes across both languages and that she points out when there are what she calls tricky words. In all of this, there is, of course, translanguaging being used. And then, of course, there is a bilingual space when they're listening and learning, where they're speaking, where they're on the rug, and where children, again, are using the language of their choice, selecting the language, and in that way, of course, Hulda is listening to what is happening to make sure that the children, that we provide for the children the translanguaging rings, the translanguaging safety rings that they need in order not to drown within the English space or the Spanish space, but only someone who is watching the children, observing them carefully, thinking of what it is that they know in each language, can then make those decisions. So thank you very much, Hulda, for a wonderful presentation. And I want to invite you to our next webinar. I want to remind you that this webinar will be archived on our webpage. And I also want to remind you that you're going to be receiving an email with an online survey, and that it's very important for us to hear what you thought of this webinar. We also want to invite you to the next network webinars from 4 to 5. We require registration. There's a wonderful one coming up on how to set up a bilingual program for young children on March 21st. The next one is at the high school level, but some of you are very interested in middle school and high school. That will be quite appropriate for you. And the last one is a team that is going to present a blueprint for a curriculum of how to incorporate translanguaging specifically in a dual language bilingual education program. So we hope that you join us on March 21st, and we are looking forward to your being with us again. Y muchísimas gracias.